This story comes from Omaha, Nebraska. Her name is Gretchen Black, and she never imagined she would be making financial decisions alone. For most of her adult life, there had always been another voice in the room. Not loud, not controlling, present, a steady voice, a familiar voice, a voice that said things like, "We'll figure it out," or "Let's look at this together," or "It'll be okay." That voice had belonged to her husband. And for decades, Gretchen didn't realize how much comfort lived in that simple fact that no matter what happened, there was always someone else carrying part of the weight. Until one quiet morning, that voice was gone. Not gradually, not gently, gone. At first, the house didn't feel empty. People came. Family gathered. Friends sat beside her on the couch and held her hand. Meals arrived in aluminum containers stacked neatly on the counter. Everyone spoke softly. Everyone told her to rest, to grieve, to take her time. She moved through the days in a kind of fog, doing what needed to be done, signing papers she barely read, answering questions she didn't fully hear. The world felt muted, like someone had turned the volume down on everything. But eventually the visitors left. The casseroles stopped coming. The phone rang less often, and the quiet settled in, not just around her, but inside her. It was one evening, long after the sun had gone down, when the fear finally made itself known. Gretchen was sitting at the kitchen table, the same table where so many conversations had once unfolded. Conversations about vacations, pairs, about someday. Folders were spread out in front of her. Bank statements, account numbers, balances she recognized, but meanings she didn't fully understand. She stared at the pages longer than she needed to, not because she was reading them, but because she was afraid of what they represented. This wasn't just money. This was her future, her independence, her safety. That's when the questions started creeping in. How long will this money last? What if I make a mistake? What if I choose wrong and there's no way to fix it? The fear wasn't loud. It didn't announce itself. It settled quietly in her chest and stayed there, tightening just enough to remind her it wasn't going anywhere. Gretchen had been married for more than 30 years. Their life together wasn't extravagant, but it was steady. They paid their bills. They saved carefully. They talked about retirement the way people talk about a place they're sure they'll get to someday, even if they haven't packed their bags yet. Her husband had always handled most of the financial decisions, not because Gretchen was incapable, but because he was good with numbers, and because over time, that's just how things had evolved. She trusted him. She paid the household bills. She knew where things were, but she didn't make the final calls, and she never imagined she'd have to. Now, sitting there alone, the responsibility felt enormous. It wasn't just the numbers. It was the finality. There was no one else to ask, no one else to double check, no one else to say, "Don't worry, I've got this." Imagining worst-case scenarios, imagining herself running out of options, imagining becoming someone who needed help instead of someone who could choose. Her son noticed the strain almost immediately. He called more often, stopped by when he could, checked in gently, carefully, as if afraid of saying the wrong thing. One afternoon, he sat across from her at the kitchen table. He didn't rush. He didn't push. He chose his words the way people do when they're trying to protect someone they love. "Mom," he said, "you've been through so much. You don't need to worry about this. I can handle the finances for you." Gretchen smiled. She nodded, but inside something tightened. Because as kind as his offer was, it terrified her. She imagined a future where every decision came with an explanation. Do I really need this? Is now the right time? Should I wait? She imagined asking instead of choosing. And beneath all of it was a deeper fear, one she barely admitted to herself. If I hand this over, will I ever get it back? She loved her son. She trusted him, but she didn't want to disappear inside someone else's decisions. She had watched other women do that, slowly, quietly, with good intentions on all sides. At first, it was just help. Then it became dependence. So she told him softly, gently, but firmly, "I'm not ready yet." Concerned, but he respected her answer. After he left, Gretchen sat alone at the table again, this time wondering if she had just made a brave decision or a foolish one, because saying no meant something else too. It meant responsibility. It meant learning. It meant facing fears she had spent a lifetime avoiding. And that scared her almost as much as losing control. A few weeks later, Gretchen met a friend for coffee, a woman who had also lost her spouse, a woman who had quietly rebuilt her life in ways Gretchen hadn't noticed at first. They talked about grief, about loneliness, about the strange fear that comes when you realize there is no one else steering the ship anymore. And then her friend said something unexpected. She talked about learning a trading framework, not day trading, not buying stocks, not watching markets all day, a structured process, rule-based, calm, something designed to generate small, consistent income, even weekly income, without needing to predict what the market would do next. Gretchen felt her stomach tighten. "I'm terrible with numbers," she said quickly, almost apologetically. It was something she had told herself for years, a story she had repeated until it felt like fact. Her friend smiled. So was I. That sentence stayed with Gretchen long after they said goodbye. At first, she dismissed the idea. This isn't for people like me. I'm not wired this way. I'll just mess it up. But the other thoughts kept returning. What if doing nothing costs me more than trying ever could? What if I don't actually want someone else deciding my future? Late one night, after staring at the ceiling for hours, Gretchen opened her laptop. She clicked on the training videos. The first time, almost nothing made sense. The language felt foreign. The concepts felt intimidating. Her confidence shrank with every unfamiliar term. She closed the laptop and told herself she'd try again later. She did, the next day, then again the day after that. She watched the training a second time, then a third. She paused constantly, rewound sections, took notes. She felt foolish. More than once, she hovered over her phone, tempted to call her son and say, "You were right. Please just take over." But something else was happening quietly beneath the doubt. She was beginning to understand. Not easily. And for the first time since her husband's death, Gretchen felt something unfamiliar stirring beneath the fear. Not confidence yet, but possibility. Possibility was a strange feeling for Gretchen. It wasn't loud or energizing. It didn't arrive with confidence or certainty. It felt fragile, like something that could disappear if she looked at it too closely. She didn't tell anyone she was watching the training videos. Not her son, not her friends, not even herself, really. It felt safer that way. Safer to explore quietly, without expectations, without the risk of disappointing someone else or herself. She watched the videos again. This time she noticed things she hadn't noticed before. Patterns, rules, structure. It wasn't gambling. It wasn't guessing. It was a framework. That word mattered to her. Framework meant boundaries. It meant steps. It meant there was a right order to things. Still, the fear didn't disappear. Every time the thought crossed her mind, I could actually do this, another thought followed quickly behind it. What if I mess this up? What if I lose what little I have left? What if this just proves I really can't do this on my own? Gretchen had spent most of her life being careful. Careful with money. Careful with decisions. Careful not to overstep into areas she didn't feel confident in. And now, suddenly, she was standing at the edge of something unfamiliar. Something that asked her to trust herself in a way she never had before. The first time she logged into the platform, her hands shook. She stared at the screen longer than necessary. She reread the instructions again and again, even though she already knew what they said. She checked her notes, then checked them again. She told herself she didn't have to do anything yet. She could close the laptop. She could walk away. No one would know. But then she thought about the kitchen table, about the folders, about the quiet fear that had settled into her nights. And she stayed. Her first trade was small. So small it almost felt insignificant. She followed the framework exactly. No shortcut, no improvising. No, I think this might be better. Just the rules. When she finally clicked the button, her heart raced. She sat back in her chair and waited. And waited. That night she barely slept. She replayed everything in her mind. Every step. Every decision. She imagined worst-case scenarios. The kind that always seemed to show up when the house was dark and quiet. But when she checked the next day, the trade had worked. Not dramatically, not life-changing, but correctly. She felt a small rush of relief. Not excitement. Relief. She told herself it was probably luck. That didn't mean anything. That she shouldn't read too much into it. So she did it again. Another small trade. Same framework. Same rules. Same careful steps. And again it worked. Something inside Gretchen shifted. Just slightly. Not confidence, not yet. Was this repeatable? She didn't rush. She didn't increase her size. She stayed small, cautious, respectful of her fear. She kept watching the training videos, still rewinding, still pausing, still feeling slow compared to the people in the examples. Sometimes she felt frustrated. Sometimes she felt overwhelmed. And sometimes, usually late at night, she questioned everything. Why am I doing this? Who do I think I am? On those nights, she would think about calling her son. She would imagine his relief when she told him she was ready to let him take over. How much easier it would be to hand this responsibility to someone else. But then another thought would appear, quieter but steadier. If I don't try now, when will I ever try? So she kept going. Week by week, her understanding deepened. The framework started to make sense in a way it hadn't before. Not just intellectually, but emotionally. She began to trust the process. And slowly she began to trust herself. After a few weeks, she noticed something unexpected. She wasn't waking up in the middle of the night as often. Her shoulders felt less tense. She breathed more deeply. The fear hadn't vanished, but it no longer dominated her thoughts. Within a month, Gretchen realized she was averaging about 1% per week. It wasn't a number she bragged about. It wasn't something she shared with anyone. But to her, it meant something profound. It meant consistency. It meant predictability. It meant she wasn't flailing in the dark. She began depositing the profits from each trade, not spending them, just acknowledging them. Proof that something was working. Proof that she could follow through. As the weeks turned into months, her confidence grew, not in leaps, but in layers. She still double-checked everything. She still respected the rules. But she no longer felt paralyzed by fear. Instead, she added to her investments slowly, intentionally, never more than she felt comfortable with. She reminded herself constantly that this wasn't about getting rich. It was about control, about choice, about knowing she wouldn't have to beg or justify or explain her life to anyone else. One afternoon, she caught herself humming while doing the dishes. The sound surprised her. It had been a long time since she had felt light enough to hum. She laughed softly at herself, a small private moment of recognition. I'm okay. That realization didn't come all at once. It came in pieces, in quiet moments, in ordinary days that no longer felt quite so heavy. 6 months after she placed her first trade, Gretchen did something she hadn't planned. She invited her son over. She didn't rehearse the conversation. She didn't script what she would say. She simply asked him to come by. They sat at the kitchen table, the same table that had once filled her with dread. This time it felt different. She wasn't nervous. She wasn't defensive. She was calm. She opened her laptop. She showed him the framework, the process, the consistency. She explained it slowly. Clearly, she answered his questions. And then she said something that surprised even her. I'm okay, she told him, and I will be. He didn't push. He listened. And then he smiled. Not the smile of someone who felt relieved to take control, but the smile of someone who saw his mother standing firmly in her own strength. After he left, Gretchen sat alone again. But this time the silence felt different. It didn't feel empty. It felt peaceful. For the first time in a long while, Gretchen wasn't afraid of what might come next. She didn't know exactly what her future would look like, but she knew something that mattered even more. She was capable. In the weeks after her son visited, Gretchen noticed something subtle but profound. She stopped bracing herself. She no longer moved through her days waiting for the next problem to appear, the next shoe to drop, the next moment when someone would need to step in and help. Instead, she began to think differently, not recklessly, not impulsively, but with a quiet sense of ownership she hadn't felt in years. When she woke up in the morning, her first thoughts were no longer about fear. They were about choice. What do I want today to look like? What feels possible now that didn't before? She still followed the framework carefully. She still respected the rules. But now, instead of fear guiding her decisions, confidence did. Not the loud kind, the earned kind, the kind that comes from repetition, from showing up, from proving to yourself over and over again that you are capable. Gretchen began to realize something important. This wasn't just about money. It never really had been. The money mattered, of course. It mattered because it represented time, freedom, options. But beneath that, something deeper had shifted. She trusted herself again. For years, longer than she wanted to admit, she had quietly believed that certain doors were closed to her, that some skills were for other people, that some opportunities belonged to a different stage of life, that she had missed her chance. Now, those beliefs no longer felt true. She had learned something new in her 60s, not because she had to, but because she chose to. That mattered. As the months passed, Gretchen's sense of security deepened. She didn't obsess over numbers anymore. She checked in regularly, calmly. She adjusted when needed. She stayed engaged without becoming consumed. And slowly, her thoughts began to stretch beyond survival. She started imagining the retirement she had once only spoken about in vague terms. Travel not rushed or exhausting, but intentional. Time with her grandchildren that wasn't clouded by worry. Family experiences she could say yes to without hesitation. She walked through her home with new eyes. The kitchen she had put off remodeling for years suddenly felt within reach. The bathroom she had learned to tolerate instead of enjoy no longer felt like something she had to accept. These weren't extravagances. They were expressions of a life she was still living, a life that belonged to her. One afternoon, as she sat quietly with a cup of coffee, Gretchen thought about the women she knew, women her age, women a little older, women who had whispered their fears in conversations that ended with phrases like, "I don't know what I'll do if." She thought about how many of them felt powerless, not because they were incapable, but because they had been told in subtle ways for decades that this part of life was about letting go of control, letting go of decisions, letting go of independence. She knew that fear intimately now. She had lived inside it, and she knew something else too. There were safe ways to learn, safe ways to grow, safe ways to stay in control. It didn't require becoming someone else. It didn't require being fearless. It required being willing, willing to learn slowly, willing to ask questions, willing to stay present even when it felt uncomfortable. Gretchen began talking differently when friends asked how she was doing. She didn't overshare. She didn't preach. But she spoke with a steadiness that hadn't been there before. "I'm okay," she would say. "I've figured some things out." And when they asked what she meant, she would smile. Not because she had all the answers, but because she no longer felt lost. Her son noticed the change too. Their conversations shifted. He no longer checked in with concern, but with respect. He asked about her plans, her trips, her projects. And Gretchen felt something she hadn't expected to feel again. Not the kind that needs validation. The quiet kind. The kind that comes from knowing you didn't give up on yourself when it would have been easier to do so. There were still moments of doubt. She didn't pretend otherwise. Some days old fears resurfaced. Some nights she still woke up wondering what the future might bring. But now those thoughts didn't spiral. They passed. Because she had something she hadn't had before. If something changed, She knew she could adapt. If life shifted again, she knew she could learn again. That knowledge became her anchor. Gretchen didn't see herself as brave. She didn't think of herself as inspirational. She simply knew that she had made a decision, a quiet one, not to disappear. And that decision changed everything. Today, her life feels full again. Not because it's perfect, but because it's hers. She travels when she wants to, says yes when it feels right, says no when it doesn't. She invests in her home, in her family, in experiences that bring her joy. And she does it without asking permission, without justifying, without fear that someone else will take it away. She knows now that independence isn't about doing everything alone. It's about having the ability to choose, to participate, to remain engaged in your own life. And if you're listening to this, if you felt that same fear creeping in, the fear of becoming dependent, the fear of losing control, the fear of being told it's too late to learn something new, know this: you are not behind, you are not incapable, and you are not finished. The second act doesn't arrive with fanfare. It arrives quietly, in a moment when you decide to stay present instead of handing your power away, in a moment when you choose learning over fear, in a moment when you decide your life is still yours. Gretchen didn't change her life overnight. She didn't gamble. She didn't leap without looking. She took one careful step at a time, and those steps added up to something extraordinary. A future shaped by choice instead of fear. A legacy of independence instead of worry. A life lived on her own terms, with dignity. And if you're wondering whether that second act is waiting for you too, it is. All it asks is that you believe just enough that you're capable of taking the first step. Are you ready to be your own hero?